My brother ruined my life and got my wife pregnant. Now he wants help after our parents disowned him and left me $2 million. Hey everyone. Before we kick off today's video, I've got a favor to ask. We've noticed our channel isn't getting as much love lately, and subscribing is one of the easiest ways you can help us out. It's quick, free, and it means we can keep bringing you awesome content. Your support really means a lot, so let's work together to keep this channel growing. Thanks a bunch. Now, let's dive into the video. Let me tell you about my younger brother, David. For as long as I can remember, he's had this weird grudge against me. If you're thinking it's some kind of jealousy thing, think again. He was the apple of our family's eye, especially with our mom. She pampered him, cooked for him, did his laundry, and even got me to help him with schoolwork. Meanwhile, I didn't get any of that extra attention, but I didn't mind too much since I was pretty independent. Maybe part of it was my fault for always helping him without asking for anything back. The thing is, he never really helped me when I needed it. He only came to me when he wanted something. While I was more of a quiet, introverted kid who liked studying and keeping to myself, David was loud and boisterous, just like our dad. I'm also pretty straightforward and blunt, and I think my mom didn't like that about me, which might have made her see me differently. Growing up, being the family favorite didn't bother me much. But stuff got real when David started picking on me for being different. He'd make fun of my height and glasses, sneak into my room, read my diary, and then snitch to mom about what I wrote. Anytime I'd call him out, our parents would just laugh it off, like it wasn't a big deal. He did some pretty nasty stuff too, like almost breaking my glasses or putting gross things in my food. Once, he even put tiny stones in my cereal, but thankfully I found them before biting down. When I told mom, she just brushed it off, saying it was brothers being brothers. David really knew how to push my buttons. At school, I was bullied by some kids, and instead of backing me up, he'd egg them on, calling me names like ugly loser or hairy monkey. He even told them I was just a big failure. During one argument over something so dumb I can't even remember, he told me to kill myself. That one really hit hard because I was dealing with some mental health stuff at the time. I'm doing better now, but hearing that from your own brother is crushing. With dad always at work and mom not really caring, she once even scolded me for annoying him. It just got worse as we went through high school. Things came to a head during high school when David shockingly tried to set my hair on fire. Astonishingly, our mom defended him, saying he was just playing. Seriously, who does that? Thankfully, my dad eventually took my side, pointing out how serious this was. He even threatened to call the cops on David. This was a wake-up call for David, as he had never faced consequences before. Dad made it clear that David needed to start respecting me. Later, Dad came into my room to chat. I never expected his support since he always told David how alike they were, which was true. But he admitted he had waited for years for David to grow up and realized he was turning into a total bully. Hearing this from Dad was validating, and I nearly cried. I told him everything David had done over the years, including the school bullying. Dad was shocked and went to school the next day to ensure those bullies were warned about severe repercussions. Later, Dad signed me up for MMA classes at a local gym. He thought it would toughen me up and help me stand up to bullies. I mean, a nerdy kid like me learning to fight probably looked ridiculous, but I was determined. I managed my time between studying and workouts, and it totally changed me. One day, David tried stealing my pocket money, which we got for chores. I'd been saving up for a while. He sneaked into my room, and I caught him right before he took off on his bike with friends. I demanded my money back, and he taunted me, saying I'd just run to Dad for help. Something snapped in me, and I punched him. He looked shocked, fell backward, and I grabbed my money from his pocket before shoving him away. David started crying, and honestly, it was kind of funny. But of course, Mom rushed out to him when she heard the commotion. She was surprised I'd fought back and scolded me. So, my mom was on my case, saying I needed to be a better role model for my younger brother, David. He seemed to get a kick out of watching her scold me. She even went to my dad, complaining about my behavior and saying I needed to be controlled. My dad wasn't thrilled and called both of us for a chat. I told him that David had swiped the money I worked hard to save, and David tried to brush it off, saying he needed the cash for a date and, as his brother, I should help him out. Dad told David he was lucky I only gave him a punch because anyone else might have called the cops for theft. He let David know that taking other people's stuff without asking is a huge no-no. David didn't take it well and had a full-on meltdown, probably hoping Mom would back him up, but Dad stood his ground. After realizing he wouldn't get punished for the punch, David yelled that he hated me and stormed off to his room, slamming the door behind him. After that whole drama, David started to keep his distance from me. It seemed like he finally got that he couldn't push me around anymore, especially since even Dad wasn't siding with him on his antics. For the first time in forever, I felt like we were kind of on an equal footing. Although he stopped trying to physically mess with me, he switched to chucking verbal jabs when Mom and Dad weren't looking. His mood got worse with age, as did his temper. Anytime I asked him something, he'd just walk away, muttering nerd or loser under his breath. If he had something to say to me, he'd do it through our mom, instead of just coming to me. I'd ask her why David couldn't just talk to me directly, and she'd always say I needed to be more understanding. It was hard to tell if it was just teenage angst or if he genuinely held a grudge. Living with his constant digs was getting unbearable, and I couldn't wait to move out. I kept asking my mom to help us sit down and talk things out, but she refused, saying she didn't want to get involved. When I asked her why David acted this way, she'd just brush off the question. Eventually, I got a scholarship to my dream university as a top student and left. My dad threw me a party, and even my mom seemed proud, but David? He stayed distant, barely acknowledging my achievements. The day I moved out was a mix of excitement for the future and relief from escaping the toxic home environment. The first few months at university were a breath of fresh air. I made new friends, loved my classes, and started to build a life away from the oppressive vibe of my childhood. Without David's constant verbal attacks, I felt a new sense of peace. During my second year, I met my wife, Karen, at a frat party through a friend. We hit it off right away. Coming from a religious background, having kids outside of marriage was a big no-no, so when we found out she was pregnant in our final year, we got married right after graduation. Our wedding was small but super joyful, and our parents were happy for us. At that moment, I really believed Karen was the love of my life. I always wanted a monogamous relationship, just one woman to come home to and share my life with. Even though other women showed interest over the years, I never pursued anything because I was genuinely happy with Karen. However, things took a dark turn. I later found out about 2 incidents of infidelity in our marriage. One was an on and off affair with her married coworker that spanned years, and the other was a brief fling with an ex-boyfriend when she visited her family. Looking back, I admit I might have been naive. Each time we separated for a bit, I chose to forgive her. I didn't want to raise our child in a broken home and believed we could fix things. I chalked the coworker affair up to youthful mistakes and lousy judgment. Things seemed better for a while, though I never completely trusted her again. Nevertheless, I tried hard to set aside my doubts, knowing if I chose to forgive, I had to truly work towards starting fresh. It's been 4 years since her second betrayal, and I felt pretty confident about giving her another shot. Karen seemed like a changed person, and we were genuinely happy, planning our family's future. But then, 3 months ago, my world was flipped upside down again. She confessed to having a long-term affair and suggested our son might not even be mine. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I was shocked, betrayed, and utterly in disbelief. In a daze, I managed to ask why she kept such a huge secret and how she could do something so devastating. Her reaction was cold and indifferent, like she was detached from the pain she caused. Her vague responses left me even more bewildered. I found myself drowning in questions and barely any answers. Facing the wrecked trust and the chaos that suddenly appeared in my family was just too surreal and too painful. I needed to know who the real father of the child I'd been raising since the start was, so I kept pushing Karen for the truth. Finally, she broke down and told me it was David. I couldn't believe it, my eyes practically popped out of my head. I asked her what she meant, and she told me how they became pals after I introduced her to my family. She was with us from Thanksgiving through New Year's. David, who was usually like an ice cube to me, was all warm and welcoming to her. I was happy about that because I didn't want Karen to feel awkward or out of place. Karen wanted to be part of the family, so she spent loads of time with my mom. She noticed how things weren't great between David and me and even asked me about it. I spilled the beans about how strained our relationship was and how it might never get better because of all his pent-up feelings. Karen seemed to get it but still started bringing David along when we went out, thinking it might help us connect. Whenever we decided to catch a movie, she'd invite David, and we'd go along with whatever flick he picked. During these outings, David and I actually talked a bit more than usual, not saying much, but at least it wasn't the silent treatment I was used to. I remember them playing video games together, but I didn't think anything of it. Karen told me that one day, David opened up to her about how bummed he was after a breakup. Feeling vulnerable, they struck up a friendship. She even mentioned how he would harmlessly flirt with her when I wasn't around, and then things spiraled out of her control. Just thinking about my wife and brother together made my stomach turn. Karen admitted she felt guilty afterward and broke things off with him, which explained why she suddenly wanted to go home before New Year's, despite my efforts to make her stay. When we got back to college after the holidays, she seemed perfectly fine, so I didn't suspect a thing. Then, 2 weeks in, we found out she was pregnant. She confessed she wasn't sure if the baby was mine or David's, and, since we couldn't prove anything, she decided to stay with me, seeing me as the more reliable option. So, we ended up getting married. My whole world felt like it was crashing down. The son I cherished might not even be mine. I asked Karen if she was still seeing David, and she hesitated before nodding. She came clean about how they always stayed in touch because they had undeniable chemistry. They'd sneak off to hotels and came up with excuses about working late. Half of her supposed business trips were really romantic getaways with him. I couldn't help but ask why she married me if David was her guy. Karen said she didn't want to be the one to call it quits. She saw me as a great dad to our son and decided to stick with me. She admitted she made a mistake and didn't know when to stop. I told Karen the first appreciated her honesty, but I was packing up and leaving. She broke into tears, asking for forgiveness, expecting me to lash out, but I just calmly packed my bags. She kept insisting if I loved her, I'd fight for us, saying every marriage has its slip-ups. When she saw that wasn't going to happen, she changed her tune, saying how divorce would impact our son and that kids deserve an unbroken home. I reminded her that I might not even be the dad, which made her cry even harder and accuse me of cruelty. She seemed to think I'd never leave. Maybe I was partly to blame for letting things slide before. Although I loved her, it was more about the idea of us having a son and being together since college. Even though Karen kept saying it wasn't too late to fix things, her words felt empty. Trust was super important, and I just couldn't believe her anymore. I might have forgiven her, but forgetting she slept with my brother was impossible. Sure, I think everyone should forgive slip-ups because we're all only human, but this crossed the line. I left her crying at the doorstep and checked into a hotel. The next day, I went to my parents and laid it all out about Karen's affair with David and how they'd been sneaking around for years. They were gobsmacked. True to form, my mom tried to defend David at first, saying her boy could never do something like that to his own brother. I was determined to get the truth out, so I asked them to hang tight and let me call David right there. I told them to stay quiet, so David would think it was just a chat between us. When he picked up, I jumped right in about the affair. At first, he was all denial, refusing to own up to anything. But when I mentioned that Karen had spilled the beans, he started to squirm a bit. So, here's the scoop. David had this knack for blaming Karen and calling her all sorts of names, saying it wasn't his fault if women flocked to him because, according to him, he was the better-looking brother. I had enough and told him straight up that I'd spill the beans about his antics to everyone. David just laughed in my face, claiming no one would believe me since he was the golden child. I couldn't help but roll my eyes at his cockiness, and thanked him for unintentionally proving me right, knowing full well our parents were listening in. That shut him up real quick, and he started stammering, trying to patch up his shattered reputation. My mom, still trying to wrap her head around what she heard, demanded David explain himself. He fumbled through some lame excuses, pinning the blame on everyone but himself, especially Karen. I could see my mom, who always had a soft spot for David, now torn between shock and anger. For me, it was a moment of victory after years of dealing with David's nonsense. The tables had turned, and his dirty deeds were finally out in the open. Even my dad, who usually keeps his feelings under wraps, couldn't hide his disappointment. He asked for the phone and laid it down for David. "David," he started, his voice full of disappointment, "what you did wasn't just betraying your brother, it was betraying the whole family. You had an affair with your brother's wife and kept it going even after they tied the knot. That's a huge deal and has completely shattered our trust in you. Both of you were raised to value family loyalty and decency, and what you did goes against everything I taught you." He let that sink in before continuing, "Your disregard for your brother's feelings and lack of respect for his marriage is unacceptable. You've not only hurt him but have also torn our family apart. Your mom and I played a part in how you turned out, but we're not putting up with this anymore. From now on, you're cut off from the college fund I set up for you. You'll have to figure out how to cover your university bills and your lifestyle on your own. You think you're more of a man by sleeping with married women? Let's see how you handle life without my support." I stood there calm, but inside, I was screaming. Watching Dad take charge was the ultimate win for me. David underestimated the fallout, and now he was feeling it. Despite David's protests, Mom couldn't defend him any longer, and Dad ended the call, cutting off David's weak justifications. Then, Mom came over and hugged me. It's been ages since we had a moment like that, and in that hug, there was an unspoken understanding and support amidst the chaos. She apologized for not believing me all these years. My 14-year-old self could have never imagined such a day where I'd feel this vindicated and loved by my mom. Following this, Dad helped me line up a solid lawyer to deal with divorcing Karen. She and her lawyer tried playing dirty, asking for alimony since I made more money. But the affair definitely worked in my favor. We also did a paternity test, and yep, it turned out David was indeed the father of the child. That news hit me hard, even more than finding out about Karen's betrayal. The boy I had loved and raised wasn't mine, and that was a tough pill to swallow. Karen pleaded with me to keep seeing him, saying he shouldn't suffer for the situation. But I just couldn't do it. Seeing him hurt too much since he reminded me of David. After getting through the divorce, I moved into my own bachelor pad and felt a wave of freedom wash over me. It was weird living solo since I got hitched so young, but I quickly got into the groove and started enjoying the single life. Then, a couple of weeks ago, Dad called me up with some big news. He said he was thinking of changing his will because he didn't want David to get anything. Once Dad made up his mind to cut David off, there was no going back. David tried reaching out and even went to their house begging for another chance, but they wouldn't budge. Even Mom, who usually caved to David's antics, seemed done with him, though I knew it was probably harder for her than anyone else. David never bothered to text me an apology, showing he had no regrets, just upset about being cut off. Dad told me he intended to leave everything to me, ensuring David couldn't contest it later, leaving him just a single buck. My jaw dropped. Dad had worked his tail off his whole life and had amassed nearly $2 million in assets, retirement funds, and life insurance. The will had just one condition, though, and if Dad passed away before. So, here's the scoop, my mom decided she'd keep living in the family house, even though the ownership was getting handed over to me. I was totally cool with it because I wanted to be there for her in her last days. But then, out of nowhere, David found out about this. Since he couldn't get in touch with our parents, he rang me up yesterday, trying to patch things up. David spilled that college was really tough for him, and after Karen dropped the paternity bomb, she started hounding him for child support. He claimed he was broke, desperately trying to land a part-time job but had no luck. He practically begged me to have a word with the family to reset things, saying he really needed my help. I couldn't help but laugh, and I straight up told him I was done with him. I mean, seriously, he should have thought about all the fallout before getting it on with my wife and getting her pregnant. David tried saying I wasn't being fair and pointed fingers at Karen, and I was like, yeah, duh, she's just as much to blame. I had already divorced her, making her his problem now. I told him he shouldn't be ringing me up to whine about her or the kid because he made his bed, and now he had to lie in it. David got all worked up and raised his voice, but I shut him down, reminding him he's now the family outcast, the one who slept with his brother's wife. That's when David lost it and started crying, saying everyone, including our grandparents and other relatives, had turned their backs on him. While it's true, it's really not my problem anymore. I told him we were done, and he should never call me again because I no longer saw him as my brother. Since that call, I've played it over in my mind. Even though I've got a lot of anger towards my brother, hearing him cry was a first since we were kids. I'd be lying if I said it didn't sting a bit to see him in such a mess. So, I'm here wondering if I should bring this up with our parents or if I'd be a jerk if I don't. Update 1. Hey everyone, many of you have been wondering why I cut ties with my son Henry, and some are even calling me heartless. I just need to clear the air. I'm really uncomfortable raising another man's child, especially when I was led to believe Henry was my son, only to later find out he's actually my brother David's kid. This revelation hit me like a ton of bricks, and I broke down for days. The main reason I can't have any contact with Henry is that I want nothing to do with Karen. If I keep any link to her child, she'll find a way to worm back into my life, and I need my own space. You might think I'm being cold or selfish, but I just can't see him again, not for a long while. Update 2. A lot of you guessed it right, it was my mom who spilled the beans to David about Dad changing his will, which led to David making that desperate call to me. I confronted her in front of Dad, and she broke down, saying I had punished David enough and that he'd learned his lesson. Dad was firm and told her if she thought what David did was forgivable, then he couldn't stay married to her because he could never forgive such betrayal. That pretty much shut her down. Dad laid it out clearly that if she ever talked to David again and we found out, she could pack her bags and go. Dad's super stubborn, so hopefully, Mom learns from this. Update 3. So, Reddit, it's been about 5 months since my last update. My relationship with my parents has gotten way better over the past few months. Dad and I hit the golf course every weekend, and he treats me more like a buddy than just his son. Although Mom misses David, she's kept her distance from him. Last I heard about David was through my cousin, who mentioned David had been hitting everyone up for money and eventually had to drop out of college because he couldn't keep up with the fees. Now, he and Karen are living together, and he picked up a part-time gig as a mechanic. Apparently, they're raising Henry together, which I guess is a good thing. My parents and I never talk about David, and they don't bring him up either. For those asking, I'm doing pretty well. I snagged a promotion at work 2 months ago, so my salary got a nice bump. I haven't been dating anyone since I feel like I need more time and space to move on. I've been seeing a therapist, so let's see how that goes. Thanks for following along, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please do and hit the notification bell to keep up with more jaw-dropping real-life stories around you.